Would you pray with me? My goodness, oh Lord, the visual canvas is spread before us in such wonderful array. Your gospel lesson, making breakfast for the disciples, calling Simon Peter. Beautiful story of the conversion and call of Saul. You have filled up our creative palate. Help us to come to some understanding of your gospel, your word, your greater desire for us in our lives. Not only individually, but collectively as your church. Open our minds and our hearts to your word. Amen. The shore of the Sea of Galilee is not a sandy beach. It is rocky in character, ranging from small pebbles in some places to larger skipping stones in others. And there are some places where there are big rocks used for piers or breakwaters. I took this photograph the last time I was in Israel. This is on the north shore of the Sea of Tiberias, the Sea of Galilee, looking due south. And you can see the Jordan River Valley at the far distance draining out. In many ways, when I think about the rocky shoreline of the Sea of Galilee, it reminds me a lot of the shoreline of our own beloved Finger Lakes. So think about the pitch black, dark, pre-dawn hours. Jesus had a plan. He gathers together some flint, some charcoal, and he brings his own fish and his own bread. And he heads down to the shore in darkness to build a fire. Jesus is calculating, right? Quite calculating. Fishing with nets from a boat on a dark night in a dark sea. Have you ever been on the water late at night? I mean, when it's pitch black out and you're floating in a boat on the water late at night. They were surrounded by dark heights, hills, ridges. And think about that fire that Jesus kindled. That fire could have been the only point of visible light. Completely 360 degrees. That fire that Jesus kindled could be the only point of light visible to Peter, Thomas, Nathaniel, James, John, and the other two unnamed disciples. Jesus wants his disciples to be drawn to the light, to be drawn to him. This encore gospel narrative in the Gospel of John is actually Jesus' fourth resurrection appearance. According to the Gospel author of John, there is one that's a personal resurrection appearance, and that is to Mary Magdalene, right? Outside the tomb. And then there are three appearances to the disciples. The first was when the disciples were gathered together in the upper room. Jesus comes and stands in front of them and breathes peace on them, delivers them the Holy Spirit, and then commissions them to go out and to forgive sins. Thomas was not there, so he comes back a week later. So that was his second appearance to the disciples. Today marks the third appearance to the disciples. We don't know when this narrative takes place. It takes place at some later time, along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, known as the Sea of Tiberias. Jesus has one more thing to do. Is this a week later? I mean, it takes about a week to walk from Jerusalem all the way up north to the Sea of Galilee. Might have been a week. Might have been longer. But Jesus has one more thing. to do. Now, you and I might appreciate those who experience a dramatic call to discipleship, kind of like Saul, right? Shazam! He's blinded and he's given the whole gospel story and he meets Jesus. And in one fell swoop, bam! Saul is Paul, converted, never to go back, never to doubt. He is set on a lifelong mission, right? Dramatic call and conversion. And you and I, we might look at people like that and go, wow, I wish that happened to me. Because you see, like most of us, I think you and I are quite similar. The call and conversion to follow Jesus Christ is much more, let's say, nuanced, complicated. It takes place over time. It's subtle. And I don't know about you, but it's often followed by periods of doubt. At least it's true in my experiences, right? But there is a gradual curve upward of spiritual development. And John records that my experience, and I think most of your experience, is quite similar to the experience of Jesus' disciples. Jesus intends to call and send his disciples yet again, one more time. Now, I was thinking about this past week. It's just too easy of a softball pitch to hit over the fence. To believe that the disciples had been so cold as to witness the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and then just left Jerusalem unmoved. I mean, after all, they went back to fishing, didn't they? But you and I, we know better, right? Life is more complicated than simply backsliding away from our faith. We backslide for many reasons, and oftentimes for numerous reasons together, right? The disciples needed to work. They needed to feed their families. We need to pay the mortgage, right? They fell back into a familiar routine that they knew that they could support themselves and others. They fell back into a routine that was safe, and they were smart enough to stick together. So Jesus calls and sends his disciples here a third time. A third time he calls them. So let's review the times that he calls his disciples. The first time takes place in the first chapter of the Gospel of John. Andrew hears the testimony of John the Baptist, and he goes to tell his brother Simon Peter. Come and see, he says. Which, of course, is quickly followed by Jesus' invitation, come and follow me. Philip and Nathanael, they followed, and it was game on. The second time takes place in the preceding chapter in the Gospel of John. We heard it just last week. The resurrected Jesus comes and stands before his disciples who are locked away in the upper room for fear of the crowd. And he breathes upon them. He says, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. Right? So I send you. Jesus calls and sends his disciples a second time. And he empowers them with the breath of the Holy Spirit to forgive sins. That's their mission. Go out and forgive sins. So here today, Jesus is cooking breakfast on the shore over a charcoal fire. You got to think to yourself, third time's the charm. Right? Like the disciples, I too understand the need for repetition. I need repetition for a concept to be firmly implanted in my brain. My own spiritual journey has been one of repetition, of going back, of discerning, examining myself, and re-examining the call with which God has called and commissioned my own life. I need repetition. And so, consistent in the Gospel of John comes recognition. I want you to think about the word recognition for a moment. Recognition. How do we recognize Jesus? We recognize Jesus in the Gospel of John whenever we see abundance. Abundance. It's always comes in the context of abundance. Think about Jesus turning water into wine. Wow. Remember Jesus and 5,000 people and their families, and he feeds them with 5 loaves and 2 fish? Wow. Think about professional fishermen today. Professionals. They go out and they get skunked. They don't catch a thing that night, right? Until the one who made the fire, the one who made the light, calls out to them and tells them to pick up their nets from the left side of the boat and cast it over the right side of the boat. My goodness, 153 fish. And they were all big fish. Thank goodness the game warden wasn't around. Jesus is known by abundance in the Gospel of John. Abundant wine, abundant fish, abundant bread, abundant patience, abundant persistence, promise, abundant forgiveness, abundant grace, and, my goodness, abundant love. To love people like you and me. The Gospel of John is the only gospel that does not have a Eucharistic feast on the night before Jesus is arrested and suffers and dies. In the upper room, the story, the narrative is about Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. You have to go to the other Gospels to find Jesus sharing bread and wine with his disciples. So here we have a gospel where Eucharist is disconnected from crucifixion. And I'd like to suggest that a Eucharist that's disconnected from the passion and crucifixion of Jesus is quite a refreshing thing. Think about it for a minute. We are now free to explore Eucharist in a new context. Jesus allows the faithful to significantly connect Eucharist with abundance. And this is a vital characteristic that should not be overlooked or underestimated in the Gospel of John. But you see here in the story, Jesus isn't done yet. So he takes Simon Peter aside. Jesus completes his third call and commission by telling him what life lived as a disciple of his is going to look like. This is what discipleship looks like, he says. Your life will become that of the Good Shepherd. Feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. Simon Peter, like you and I, who are good students of the Gospel of John, should remember what Jesus had taught them in the 10th chapter. He says, I am the Good Shepherd. I am the gate for all my sheep. A good shepherd leads his sheep and they follow. The sheep follow because the Good Shepherd knows them by name. The Good Shepherd comes that the sheep may have life, and that life might be abundant. The Good good shepherd is willing to lay down their life for their sheep. Feed my lambs, Jesus tells him. Tend my sheep. That's what a life of discipleship looks like. Simon Peter finally gets it, and he understands. So this morning, like Simon Peter and the rest of the disciples, we too have gathered to have breakfast with Jesus, right? As we dine at this Eucharistic meal, may we be mindful of Christ's abundance, his abundant love and grace, and thank God for God's abundant forgiveness. May we be encouraged that though we might face times and circumstances of doubt and uncertainty, that our overall spiritual trajectory will arc straight to the heart of God. May we be inspired to again answer our shepherd's call, to feed and to tend his sheep. Be the good shepherd, and to God be the glory.